Yeah. Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Carol. How are you?
Good, good.
Wonderful.
Everything's a little hectic. I almost forgot about the class.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's been a little busy.
Yeah. So I don't even know what Parsha it is.
Balak. Hi, Charlotte.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. Are you coming down after your wonderful birthday celebrations?
Yes.
Oh,
It's
happy.
Dan.
Yeah, so sorry I was late the other night because
Oh, that's all right. You have
yeah,
other things to do.
yeah, well,
I don't know where this is.
now here's Maddie.
Okay.
It's nice to see everyone again. I mean, not that we haven't seen each other at other things,
Hi, Maddie.
but it's nice to be back to class.
Mm-hmm. Last weekend I was busy.
Right, you were away. I was
away.
At graduation.
Yeah, I might be away next week, not sure.
Hi, Maddie.
The girls are at camp now?
Yep. Well, actually, they, it was a whole rigmarole getting them there. But Noah finished her quarantine, and she is now at the camp. So she'll be there for Shabbat. And Lisa is finishing up her quarantine. And sometime next week, we'll be headed up to camp.
Wait, what are people like? I'm sure you knew people where they could stay to quarantine.
Yes.
But what do people do who are sending their kids up there and they don't know?
Well, they're not, none of the kids, Camp Ramon Canada is not accepting any of the American students.
Whoa.
So for example, the oldest division, Alonim, they are going to be at Camp Ramah in Palmer, Massachusetts.
Oh, that's where Maya's.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All the kids will be up there. It's
I thought it was called Nevonim for the oldest ones, but
yeah, well, in Canada it's Alonim.
Oh, okay.
But they'll be together. It's just really a shame because each camp has its own unique elements, and the Alonim summer is really quite remarkable in the stuff they do, and they're going to miss out on that. So, so for people have found different places for the adult staff or the staff to quarantine when they get up to Canada. And the Mishlachat, for example, they made arrangements for the Mishlachat, the Israeli contingent, to quarantine in the camp. So it's crazy.
What about if people are vaccinated?
Well, that's the funny thing. They're having a lot of problems up in Canada, but basically all the American staff is already vaccinated. So it's kind of funny that they have to come up and quarantine.
Right.
But
you hear about that government building in Florida?
Oh, yes.
And one person in the whole large group that didn't get it was vaccinated. So he didn't get it. And I guess the other people were not vaccinated. That's just my assumption.
Yeah, well, the vaccine, thank God, is very effective.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it's the areas that aren't vaccinated in this country that is seeing the greatest rise.
Right.
And there are also other issues. There are people who can't get vaccinated, like children. People who are immunosuppressed are still at risk. So, that's why and the Jewish world is being a little cautious and just opening up everything.
And now you have that Delta strain.
Exactly.
In fact, Israel has seen several cases of people who were vaccinated and still got the Delta virus.
But how sick did
I sent that to you,
Yeah, you got,
there were two articles, one in English and one in Hebrew.
Yeah.
It's mainly the younger population.
But Yehudi, how sick did those people get that were vaccinated and got it?
Look, Maddie, if you're a person who's high risk, you're not interested in getting supposedly a mild case of coronavirus. Right. You don't want to get any case of coronavirus, okay? because if you're at high risk, any case can be fatal.
Right.
And let's say Delta infects you, then, you know, if you're at high risk, it could kill you or disable you or end up with what's called long coronavirus. I mean, people are really being
those people have to know that and continue to wear masks and continue to not to go into groups.
Well, as of noon today, Israel put the mask mandate back into effect.
Yeah, that's new. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't either.
Noon today, because I just spoke to my daughter before, you know, she lit candles, and she said she had clients coming in just before noon and they weren't wearing masks. And then she had somebody who came in just at noon and they said, do we have to put our masks on?
Yeah, no, Emily said the same thing. They're back to being masked. So I hope they can leave the country in 2 weks.
Well, I hope that Monique can land on Sunday.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it's still, there's still so much uncertainty. And I, you know, obviously I understand totally people's desire to get rid of the masks and all of that. But, you know, for meeting in large groups, and you don't always know who's going to be there.
Nor do you know if they're immunized or not.
Right. So you don't know if there's someone's immunized. And again, do we necessarily know everyone who's immunosuppressed because of different illnesses, people going through chemo, someone who's had a transplant? You know, it's still
old, Rabbi Pop.
Yeah.
I have a question. My question is, you know, they're talking about people going to ball games or to concerts, and they're having sections for immunized and sections for not immunized. So apparently they're asking, those people
they're not asking, it's on the honor system, Maddie. My shul's doing that. My shul in Brooklyn has a section, masked people, and those are people who are not immunized, and people who say they're immunized and go into the section without a mask, but nobody's requiring them to produce a card. I haven't yet been asked by one person to produce a card.
Me either, but I take it everywhere I go.
Yeah, I do too. I put it in my wallet. Darn right, I take it everywhere I go.
I was at a wedding that required everybody to send in proof of their vaccination.
That's a private affair.
Yeah.
So there are certain private in private situations that are able to ask, able to do that, and there's a whole question about synagogues, and you know, we're at least the letter we just sent out. Of course, you know, we decided that on that, you know, a week ago. Who knows what's going to happen in another month? You know, for the holidays, and even for now.
That's the most vaccinated country in the world. Okay. And right now they suddenly have to reinstitute their mask mandates, like Ricky just told us.
Yep.
If that's what happened in Israel, what could possibly happen here?
Yeah.
Yep.
I just read. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. If you want to start.
Well, no, go ahead. Start. I could share the screen without.
I just read a woman died last month. She got vaccinated, but she was a transplant recipient, and she caught it. She still caught the virus from, even though she had 2 shots of Moderna, she caught the virus from an unvaccinated person. And because of a transplant, her body could not develop any antibodies. And it's a very, very rare case. But to date, I read 525 people died from that. They said 47% of people with transplants do not develop antibodies.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
it's dangerous. Well, we still, you know, hope and pray for relief. And, you know, on Saturday night, we do the psalm that asks God to protect us from plague with the second bracha after the Shema in the evening. You know, these prayers are very important. So we are up to Parashat Balak. which is, of course, a delightful parasha in many ways. It's quite humorous. Just say the words talking ass in English, and of course, that's humorous. I mean, you know, you might think somebody's talking about a politician, but the reality is that's meant to be funny. And then, of course, we know when Bilam goes about trying to curse Israel, and he has Balak running around like a crazy person, come set up all these altars, you know, and offer all these animals, and, you know, it's all done, and Bilam opens his mouth and praises Israel, and Balak says, no, let's try this again. And they go to a second place and a third place. There's definitely a lot of humor in this parasha, and one of the only two parshiot named after non-Israelites, Yitro and Balak. Well, here, let's read, before we read the section, we're not going to look at this whole parasha. We're going to look actually at Bilam's last oracle on Israel, because it has some significance in later Jewish thinking. But we'll take a look at Ibn Ezra's rather pshat commentary, and then how some other early Jewish commentators or texts dealt with it. But first of all, let's just get an overall picture of this from Milgram's commentary. Would someone like to read here?
I'll read.
Go on, Carol. Okay.
Rabbinic tradition calls these chapters the section of Balaam, a designation that accords with the view that the Torah was compiled from disparate scrolls. Clearly, the rabbis believe that the Balaam story was composed independently and only later inserted into the Pentateuchal corpus. Indeed, these chapters are totally distinct from the larger context. Neither the personalities nor the events in them appear in the adjoining chapters. There is only one connecting link. As in chapters 21 and 25, the Israelites are encamped on the borders of Moab. In fact, the juxtaposition of these chapters to chapter 25 reflects the tradition found in 31:16 that it was Balaam who advised the Midianites to seduce Israel at Shittim.
Remember, there's a very unusual, I mean, there are kind of two perspectives on Balaam within the biblical text. You know, one is that he just does what God tells him to do. And then this other tradition that he was an instigator of some of the problems against Israel.
The action moves swiftly. Balak, king of Moab, hires the renowned seer Balaam to curse Israel. Balaam consents only when he receives the Lord's permission, and further warns Balak that he will speak only as the Lord directs him. On these occasions involving a sacrificial ritual and change of site, Balaam blesses the Israelites instead of cursing them. And in a fourth oracle, he predicts the eventual doom of Moab at the hands of Israel. Balak's curse, intended for Israel, will instead be inflicted by Israel on Moab.
And that's the section we're going to look at. And then, you know, again, within Milgram's long commentary, the larger, I mean, from which the Eitz Chaim is taken, you know, the larger volume, there are a number of excurses in the end, studies on certain sections that expand beyond the commentary to deal with certain sections.
But Rabbi, what does excursus mean?
It really means an
appendix.
Appendix, yeah, that's probably the best thing, like an additional section.
Additional.
That goes on beyond. So let's take a look just at this last oracle. I'm not trying to minimize any of the other sections by any stretch of the imagination. Of course, the one that immediately precedes this one, which really takes, what's so remarkable about these concluding sections is that this takes place without any of the sacrifices. basically, Bilam looks out and sees Israel, and that's what brings on the spirit of prophecy. In fact, the text says, let me just get to it. So, he gives, now Bilam, seeing that it pleased God to bless Israel, did not, as on previous occasions, go in search of omens, but turned his face toward the wilderness. As Bilam looked up and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, the spirit of God came upon him. So it was just the sight of Israel. It's no longer all this preparation that he does in the other oracles. And then he, of course, praises Israel, which doesn't make Balak too happy. And then he tells them, listen, I told your messengers, I can't say anything that God doesn't tell me to say. So don't, this is not your fault. This is what God desired. And then he tells Balak, and Carol, do you want to continue reading here? Oh, let me make this larger. Sorry.
Okay.
That should be better.
Okay. I don't need my reading glasses. And now, as I go back to my people, let me inform you of what this people will do to your people in days to come. He took up his theme and said, word of Bilam, son of Beor, word of the man whose eye is true.
Okay, before we go any further, we have to realize that this is kind of an expression that is used throughout this section, excuse me, sorry, there's just someone walking. Oh, it must be our landscaping guys who are coming to do some work. So let me get to the section. It's funny as the section with the donkey is. First of all, he begins we'll see in a moment how he begins all of his sections by saying he took up his theme. That's how they translate it. And the Hebrew is mishalo. There's no precise rendering for this term, which applies to many kinds of discourses, and it lists all the different ways in which the term mashal is used. It is, however, never used for the discourses of Israel's prophets, a clear indication that the book of Bilam never intended Bilam's oracle to be reckoned as prophecy. Kind of important that even within the text, they're distinguishing between Bilam and Israelites' prophecy. Let me just get to oh, sorry, I just have to find, I unfortunately didn't mark it.
You're saying that they are looking upon this as not prophecy?
Yeah, which I find to be a little bit odd, because
we pretty much came to the conclusion that they are looking at it as prophecy.
Yeah. So that I'm not quite sure why Milgram wrote that, because they, in fact, throughout rabbinic literature, Yudis bring up a very good point, because throughout rabbinic literature, they make a distinction between the prophecy of non-Jews, or in this case, Bilam, and the Israelite prophecy. But they certainly seem to imply that Bilam is a prophet.
And this last prophecy is not one he's forced to say. He volunteers to say it. Yeah, so basically that's his own.
Yeah, and Ruach Elohim comes upon him. Yeah, in fact, here in Carol, would you read here the word of Bilam as a Ne'um Bilam, which begins in the third oracle, not in the right here, word of Bilam.
A self-introduction would have been expected at the beginning of a poem, not in its third stanza. However, in contrast to the prior oracles, God does not this time put words in his mouth. Thus Balaam can say that these are truly his words. God has inspired the message, but it is he, Balaam, who has put it into words. The divine origin of his message is made explicit in the next verse. Similarly, King David, after opening his poem with the same formula of self-introduction, Naum, also immediately identifies its divine origin. The word of David, son of Jesse, the word of the man whom God raised up. The Spirit of the Lord has spoken through me. His message is on my tongue. Indeed, the choice of Naum for word is probably deliberate. It nearly always indicates a divine utterance.
Yeah, so, yeah, that last part, it's not prophecy. It's different kind of prophecy, but, it's prophecy. So I really, thank you for bringing that up, Yuri. I mean, that is, just doesn't seem to jive with everything else he's saying. Now, here is this expression, Shatum Ha'ayin. Right here, whose eye is true. Carol, you can keep going.
Two other renderings have been suggested. One, whose eye is open. The root Shin Tav Mem in Rabbinic Hebrew means be open, supported by the parallelism with eyes unveiled, and by a medical text from Nimrod. If someone falls to the ground with his eyes wide open, he has been possessed by Galu demon.
Yeah, so, so it could mean whose eye is open, because not only do we have a parallel here in the very verse, but also we take a look at surrounding culture, and there is, in fact, a similar use of this word. But it could also be the opposite. Go on, number two.
Whose eye is closed. See, what is it, Lamentations?
Yeah.
Where shatam is equivalent to satam, close. That is, Balaam was heretofore blind to God's revelation, or he was actually physically blind, which would account for God's having to open his eyes to see the angel. However, this latter interpretation faces the objection that in 22:41 and 23:13, Balaam had to see the Israelites in order to curse them, a fact that he confirms in his oracles in 23:9.
Yeah, so just a little bit on the language. Okay, keep going, Carol. Here, word of him.
Word of him who hears God's speech, who obtains knowledge from the Most High, and beholds visions from the Almighty, prostrate, but with eyes unveiled.
Yeah, so here, I'd say from the text itself, it very much seems that this is indeed a prophecy, that Balaam's words are in some way coming from God. And here is this, the prophecy for Israel against Moab.
What I see for them is not yet. What I behold will not be soon. A star rises from Jacob. A scepter comes forth from Israel. It smashes the brow of Moab, the foundation of all children of Seth.
Okay, so very poetic. A star rises from Jacob. A scepter comes forth from Israel, smashes the brow of Moab, foundation of the children of Shet. According to tradition, Moab, or the text, Moab is predominantly a descendant of Shet, the son of Noah. So
Moab is from Lot, not from Noah.
Right. But ultimately from Noah.
Well, so is everybody else.
Yeah, well, that's... Okay, go on.
Where are we?
Yeah, Edom becomes
a possession, Seir, a possession of its enemies, but Israel is triumphant. A victor issues from Jacob to wipe out what is left of Ir.
There's the expression Ir Moav. So basically, there's a short little prophecy that Israel is eventually going to rise up and destroy Moab. And we will see how Ibn Ezra explains what is the pshat of this text. So let's take a look at Ibn Ezra. Who would like to read?
Ricky.
Who volunteered?
Ricky.
Ricky, thank you.
Okay. What I see?
Yes.
What I see to them is not yet. It appears to me that this prophecy refers to King David. Bilam said is not yet, for it referred to an event 400 years later.
Yeah, so very simply, well, you know, he said it's not yet happening. Bilam is making this prophecy, but it takes place in the time of David. And he now just is going to explain the style, the poetic style.
What I behold will not be soon. Scripture repeats itself. The star and the scepter are parable.
Yeah, so basically it's poetic style. It's, you know, as we've often seen that in classical Hebrew poetry, what they used to call parallelism, that two lines may say kind of the same thing in different words. It's not just that two stitches may be parallel, but you know, this is a very, very common thing in ancient Hebrew, and really through the Middle Ages, even into our later prayers. And by the way, you know, the section of talking about this is King David, and scepter comes forth. Well, before we go any further, I should just point out that this language about referring to Israel eventually conquering Moab is got a parallel in that there is some language elsewhere in the Bible that seems to reflect the same thing. So if we go back to Genesis 39, here in the footnote, we have the blessings of Judah that are given to Yaakov. Ricky, go ahead.
You, O Judah, your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the nape of your foes. Your father's son shall bow low to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. On pray, O pray, my son, have you grown? He crouches, lies down like a lion, like the king of beasts who dare rouse him.
Almost a very similar language actually appears in the previous oracle of Bilam, where he says, they shall devour enemy nations. They crouch, up in verse 9 of Numbers 24. They crouch, they lie down like a lion. Kara shachav ka'ari. Ulchelavi miyakimenu, like the king of beasts who dare rouse them. So there's similarity to the language. And then here, a similar kind of language. This last line, not the last line, there's another line in the bracha, but this is enough for now. Go ahead, Ricky.
The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. So that tribute shall come to him, and the homage of peoples be his.
Okay, so that I'm sorry I didn't point that out before, is that the language of Bilam is repeated elsewhere in the Tanakh. And also, when we're talking about Genesis 39 and talking about the tribe of Judah as having kingship, what kingship does that generally refer to or suggest? Who came from Judah? Which king? Well, when in the United Kingdom, the first three kings, who's the one that came from Judah?
David.
David, exactly. So generally, this refers to David. And this is Ibn Ezra's interpretation. So now he comes to another verse. Well, actually, it's the same verse. Darach kochav mi Yaakov v'kam shevet mi Yisrael. A star rises from Jacob, a scepter comes forth from Israel. And now we'll see how Ibn Ezra interprets it.
A star rises. There are images of stars that step forth in the sky that never existed and were never known.
Yeah, like, before contemporary astronomy, and even in contemporary astronomy, as we can see further into the universe, there are things that we have not really noticed and certainly wouldn't be noticed by the eye that suddenly they're there.
Rabbi Popky,
Yeah.
I don't think that the English translation captures what Ibn Ezra says.
Okay.
Darachim doesn't mean step forth. Darachim is like, darach basically is what you do with an arrow when you pull a bow. Mm-hmm. So I think what they're talking about here is shooting stars or comets or something that suddenly swishes over the sky the way an arrow swishes over. Darach pashto ki oyev.
Yes.
In other words, I think Ibn Ezra says it right. It's just the English translation.
Translation is not, yeah. And in fact, actually, we should go back to Milgram. Let me. I didn't think we would have time for it, but the previous oracle of Balak, Bilam is quite beautiful. Okay. Let me, yes, here. Did someone have a question? So here, yeah, again, the word darach as rises may not be the actual translation. So let's take a look how Milgram explains it. Somebody else like to read this one?
I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
For its military connotation, see Deuteronomy and Isaiah. The rendering here is doubtful since it regularly means march, trample in scripture. The meaning prevail has been suggested from Ugaritic, Darkatu.
Yeah, Ugaritic was one of the ancient Near Eastern city-states, and the language is particularly influential in terms of, is very important for understanding biblical Hebrew.
And as hinted by Targum on
Unclus, that's the standard translation into Aramaic.
And if the mem of mi Yaakov is transferred to the previous word without changing its meaning, and eclitic, a line will read, when the stars of Jacob prevail. The meaning is aimed. The meaning is
okay. It's a new sentence. So darach, which JPS translated as rises, and Milgram, as Yehudi pointed out, that's not necessarily the right translation. First of all, the word generally means march or trample, and prevail might be a better translation with that meaning, because we also have both in Ugaritic and in an early Aramaic translation a word that is much closer to when the stars of Jacob prevail. And now, finally, this last meaning that Yehudi had suggested, the meaning
is aimed, has also been suggested, the star/comet imaged as an arrow. If, however, the above interpretation for kochav is adopted, darach can have its attested meaning of march.
Yeah.
What's the above interpretation for Kosov?
Yeah. I actually like the Rach Kashto. That was the first thing I thought of. So I kind of like that. And now here also, when they talk about Shevet, which is generally scepter. Keep going.
Hebrew Shevet also means meteor, based on Akkadian
Shibtu.
and on rabbinic.
Yeah, what, you don't know Akkadian and Ugaritic?
Who's
one
laughing
of my
at me?
one of my friends.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you.
Yeah, because you know.
I know. It describes both gods.
Wait. Actually, before that, I just have to mention that, you know, we use ancient Near Eastern languages to help us understand the Hebrew. One of my friends in rabbinical school had a kippah with his Hebrew name written in Akkadian characters.
Yeah.
Someone had crocheted it for him. It was quite funny.
Cute.
Okay, so anyway, Hebrew Shevet can also mean meteor, or go on. It describes
both gods and kings. For example, the god Nergal is called Shibti of the comet, and on the poetical stela of Tutmos the third.
Yeah, that's an Egyptian king. Stela is a stone monument, basically.
You mean it's not Stella?
No.
Very funny.
God Amen-Re proclaims, I let them see your majesty as a shooting star that scatters fire as it sheds its... Shevet has three usual meanings. One, scepter refers to the king's insignia, as in Genesis and Isaiah. Ancient Egyptian iconography represents the victorious pharaoh striking the enemy with his scepter. Two, ruler refers to the one who wields the scepter, as in Genesis and Deuteronomy. Three, tribe refers to its military units, as in Judges and Samuel. If Kohav can mean host, then this last rendering for Shevet is best.
Okay, so
it could also mean
I'm done.
Very good.
Okay, so you know, so this image, you know, the Rach Kochav, you know, a star and a scepter, you know, there are a lot of ways of understanding them. Now we come to Ibn Ezra's interpretation. Somebody else want to continue? This is all in English, by the way. Well, I mean, it's in Hebrew, but it's translated into English. Somebody else would like to continue?
I nominate Shell.
Yeah, I'll read. There may be some background noise because I have 8 grandkids here, right?
Okay, well, I've got
8 grandkids. God bless you.
I've got a lawnmower in the background. I don't know if you can hear it.
No.
Good.
Okay, a scepter comes forth. The reference is to a royal scepter. I believe that comes forth means that the star shall be seen making its way, as in the stars in their courses.
Yeah, that's from the Song of Devorah. Okay.
Many explain that the reference is to the Messiah. The ancients said that...
Okay, so that's one sentence. Many explain that the reference is to the Mashiach.
Right.
But then, talking about our rabbis...
The ancients said that Sennacherib,
yeah, the Assyrian king.
Yeah, mixed up the nations. However, note that the scripture speaks of Moab, Amalek, and Assur. Furthermore, why does Balaam conclude with "and shall afflict Eber"?
Anyway, so the point is, if Sennacherib mixed up all the people, and this is what happened, you know, we know that Assyria came in, and when they conquered a land, they would move its inhabitants, they would exile them to another land and put in people conquered from another place. By mixing up everyone, it really cut down on rebellions because one, people were not tied to the new land and didn't, have this great, as strong a feeling toward the land, certainly didn't know it and couldn't set up a guerrilla army or a military campaign quite as easily. So this is something that the rabbis raise in the Talmud, in this particular one in Yuma. So just finish this off, go on.
Sure. On the contrary, Balaam should have ended his parable with a star rises from Jacob.
Yeah, so if it's messianic, then it would have been enough just to say that line. Why do you need to talk about all these other peoples? Because they, by the time the Mashiach comes, they've all been scattered anyway. And then in the subtle language of the medieval writers, here Ibn Ezra comments.
Sure. Those who lack intelligence think that anyone who explains that there shall step forth a star refers to King David, denies the coming of the Mashiach.
Yeah, so in other words, if you're saying that this is referring to King David, as Ibn Ezra has said, that, if you're not reading this in a messianic fashion, then, oh my God, you're denying the coming of the Messiah. And you already get a sense of what Ibn Ezra thinks about that. Go on.
Far be it, for the Mashiach is clearly stated in the prophecy of Daniel. I have already explained that Daniel first mentions the coming into existence of the Greek kings and the arising of the Hasmoneans. He mentions the existence of the second temple, the years of the siege, the exile, and the salvation. He notes these things in order. There is no conceivable need for another prophet, since we have the words of Moshe, who is the most important prophet.
Yeah, so first of all, we have very clear messianic statements in Daniel. So what if you don't see this text as messianic? We have a very clear messianic text in Daniel, and you don't even need Daniel because we have Moshe.
Even if your outcasts are at the ends of the world.
Yeah, so this is oh, sorry, I didn't translate the very end. V'shav Adonai Elohecha et shvutech, God will return, and your God will return you. So basically, at the end of Deuteronomy, when Moshe is kind of giving his words to the people and understanding what's going to happen, he's saying, in the future, there's going to be an exile and redemption. And there too, so you have plenty of texts. What he's basically saying is you have plenty of texts that are messianic. You don't need to declare this as messianic. And yeah,
you don't need to declare it as David either. About Saul, it says that Saul defeated the Moabites. In other words, there's nothing in this particular statement of Bilam that forces us to assume that what he's talking about is David. I hate to say it, but Yiftach defeated the Moabites before Saul did.
Right, that was last week's Torah.
Right, exactly. So I mean, this assumption that is talking about David is pushing forward a great deal. I don't even think that Shevet Yehuda is talking about David, except in terms of the Leah tribes, because the whole force of Sefer Bereshit is clearly to put the Rachel tribes first. So it doesn't make sense that the Sefer would end up making it look like Judah's going to rule over the entire united monarchy. It probably just means among the tribes coming from his mother. Remember, even in Megillat Ruth, even the people in Beit Lechem say, Yitain Hashem Lechem at, Kirachel Leah. Now, why in the world would they put Rachel first? Unless that was already known to everyone, given the fact that Rachel is the younger of the two children.
Right.
Okay. So nowhere in the Tanakh does it ever put Leah first. So you have to assume that basically this is in other words, these type of interpretations require a certain amount of elasticity. They don't have to be shot. And I don't think we have to assume that that's shot either.
Yeah. And, again, here we have a line. The next commentary is Ibn Ezra, again, connecting to David. But you're right. I mean, I think a lot of it, when like Milgram and other commentators, want to connect it to David, and not so much Ibn Ezra, but certainly modern commentators, it's, their notions of how the text came to be, that it was during the period of David or the United Monarchy that these texts were written or edited, and therefore they have to be referring to the Davidic monarchy. But I think you're right. You just have to be much more open. That, yeah, there's a good chance it's David, but not necessarily. But here, let's just see again Ibn Ezra's point that this prophecy of Bilam relates to David. Shel, do you want to read this
I'll
one?
continue.
Yeah,
this is what David did.
Yeah, in other words, he smashed the brow of Moab, and we can see down in a very clear verse in 2 Samuel.
Yeah, he also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground, and he measured them off with a cord. He measured out 2 lengths of cord for those who were to be put to death, and 1 length for those to be spared. The Moabites became tributary vassals of David.
Yeah, so that's a pretty strong statement about what he did to Moab.
Yeah.
So, okay. Now, needless to say, though Ibn Ezra understands this prophecy that way, that it's not necessarily, any kind of messianic prophecy, and I think that is the pshat, whether you apply it to David or to Shaul. It's looking forward to the future. However, we have to remember that this is introduced by the words here, let me inform you of what the people will do to your people, ba'achrit hayamim, in days to come, which is really the correct translation.
Hayamim could also mean just the future. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to mean the end of days.
Right.
Like most of the time, it means just the future.
Exactly.
A kid doesn't exist in Tanakh except in a different meaning.
Yeah.
Not in the meaning of future.
Right. So it just means the future. However, as we know, again, from the blessing of Jacob to his sons, that, sometimes we read a little bit more in scripture. And going back to early Israel, just after the biblical period, we have this section this is not any great proof of anything, by the way, but I just want to bring it in. We have this document called the Damascus document. They found in the Geniza in Cairo this document that talks about what seems to be a group of Jews that moves to Damascus, leaves Jerusalem, and they are the inheritors of God's true message. And no one really knew who they were. In fact, Ginsburg wrote a famous work, An Unknown Jewish Sects, Eine bekannte jüdische Sekt. But then, when we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, we discovered sections from this document. Obviously, what was in the Geniza was a medieval copy of an ancient document that had been preserved, which seems to be one of the different collections of sectarian documents at Qumran that describe the life of the group that lived there. It's may not be totally correct to say a sect, but so who would like to read? Or Shel, do you want to continue?
Yeah, I'll continue. I just have a question. What does CD mean?
CD means Damascus document.
Covenant of Damascus.
Yeah,
Okay.
covenant.
Damascus.
Right.
Okay.
The Dead Sea Scrolls are identified by where they were found. So the Damascus document was found first in the Geniza.
Okay.
Obviously, much later text than the Dead Sea Scrolls, but then they found fragments or sections from CD, and they just refer to it as, this is how we know this document. But normally you will see 4Q. It was found in the 4th cave at Qumran, or 11Q.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay. But all those who despise,
there's a break.
Yeah, when God visits the earth in order to empty over them the punishment of the wicked, when there comes the word which is written in the words of Isaiah, son of Amos, the prophet, which says, there shall come upon you, upon your people, and upon your father's house, days such as have not come since the day Ephraim departed from Judah. When the two houses of Israel separated, Ephraim detached itself from Judah, and all the renegades were delivered up to the sword. But those who remained steadfast escaped to the land of the north.
Sorry about that.
As he said, I will depart the Sukkot of your king, is that?
Yeah, that should be
king, and the Qiyam of your images away from my tent to Damascus. The books of the law are the sukkah of the king.
That's what Sikut is.
Yeah. As he said, I will lift up the fallen sukkah of David. The king is the assembly, and the plinths of the images and the Qiyum of the images are the books of the prophets, whose words Israel despised.
In other words, obviously, he's taking these verses and he's giving them a much more allegorical interpretation.
Right. Sure. And the star is the interpreter of the law, who will come to Damascus, as is written. A star rises from Jacob, and a scepter comes from Israel. The scepter is the prince of the whole congregation, and when he rises, he will destroy the sons of Seth.
So here, just an example of how an early Jewish community is using this verse. They're seeing it as it's not necessarily messianic. The whole question of what they believed about the Messiah in the Qumran documents is a little bit complicated. Some say it believes in 2 messiahs. There's a lot of pushback against that idea. Here it's not necessarily a messiah in the sense of a more supernatural figure, but that maybe they're talking about certain individuals who had certain roles, a scepter, probably as some kind of king of Israel. Then it changes a little more when we get to one of our later Targumim, the Targum Yonatan. There are various Aramaic translations of the Bible. Targum Onkelos is the kind of standard, and it's a fairly pshat translation. It pretty much just translates the Hebrew. However, the other Targumim often add a great deal of midrashic material. So there is Targum Yerushalmi, there's Targum Yonatan. There was a Targum that was discovered in the Vatican, a manuscript of a Targum called the Neophiti manuscript. And what's interesting about that is their marginal notes in the manuscript itself, which seem to indicate yet another tradition or 2 other traditions, Targumic traditions. So within this one document, there could be up to 3 translations or translation traditions. But here, Targum Yonatan, which can be published in the standard editions of the Bible, they add a little bit to this translation of B'midbar Kaf Dalet. And Shelley, you can keep going.
Sure.
First of all, it's just kind of a translation of the verse itself.
Okay. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but it is not near. When the mighty king of Jacob's house shall reign, and when the Mashiach, the power scepter of Israel, be anointed. He will slay the princes of the Moabite and bring to nothing all the children of Sheth, the armies of Gog, who will do battle against Israel, and all their carcasses shall fall before him.
Okay, this is moving into obviously messianic territory because he talks about the Mashiach, the power scepter of Israel. And the notion that comes from Yechezkel of the great battle of Gog and Magog, who will come and attack Jerusalem and be defeated. That's definitely part of messianic speculation. So the
Rabbi Popky,
yeah,
again, the translation is misleading. The Rabbi Mashiach means the Mashiach will become great. And then when it says V'shevet takif mi Yisrael, that's a second statement. Okay. In other words, when they proceed to say, read it, Mashiach, in English, that totally does not give you the actual force of the Hebrew.
Yeah.
The Aramaic.
Yeah. Sorry, I just copied the translation.
Mashiach means HaMashiach.
Right. Yeah.
But it is interesting for another reason, which is, as you're bringing out in this really excellent presentation you're giving today, everybody seems to know exactly what the Rach Kochav and Yaakov is, or at least they think they do. But nobody really has the faintest idea of what, Kar Kol B'nai Shet means. Okay? For every one commentator, you get a different interpretation of that. In other words, here, Shet is Gog and Magog. Who would have ever thought that?
Yep. Now, just to bring us back to earth a little bit, throughout our tradition, we have had messianists and those who, more revolutionary messianists and those who are more evolutionary messianists, as my teacher would put it. And here's a very famous, I just want to conclude with this very famous section of Talmud from the Yerushalmi. Tani Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Akiva Rabbi Ayad Doresh, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai taught, my teacher Akiva would interpret, Darach Kochav mi Yaakov, Darach Kozva mi Yaakov. He would interpret a star rises from Jacob, Kosiba rises from Jacob. And when Rabbi Akiva, Kad Hava Chame bar Koziba, Hava Amar, when Rabbi Akiva would see bar Kosba, or Kosiba is what it should be. And this, of course, is bar Kochba. He would say, Deinhu Malka Mashiach. This is the King Messiah. So we know that Rabbi Akiva, or at least the Talmud tells us that Rabbi Akiva was a great supporter of Bar Kochba and his revolt against Rome, and even saw him as the Messiah. By the way, Messiah not necessarily being a supernatural character, but simply being the king who is going to lead Israel back to control of its land and its destiny. But then we have the response of one of his colleagues, Amarle Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta. Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta said to him, Akiva, yalu asabim b'lechayich v'adayin ben David lo yavo. Akiva, grasses will grow from your cheeks, and the son of David will still not have come. What does that mean? Grasses will grow from your cheeks?
Long after you're dead.
Yep.
By the way, I think, as you pointed out, but I think let's make it a little more clear. The Bar Kochba has three names. His real name was Ben Kusiba with a samach, which would be an S, not a Z.
Right.
Okay. Those people who saw him as Messiah called him Bar Kochba because they saw him as the star that is we're working on right now. Later on, though, since he disappointed, he was called Ben Kuziva. Kuziva is a promise that you think is going to come true, but doesn't come true. Okay? So, in other words, the quote from the Yerushalmi might be correct, but if that's the case, Yerushalmi itself, probably if we had a better gears of the Yerushalmi, it would say there Kusiva and not Kuziva.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah, probably the manuscript, because obviously the Yerushalmi is at the very least 100 years later, more likely like 300 to 400. Sorry. Okay,
so for him, with the latest stuff that the Jewish Theological Seminary is doing, assembling all the news from the various fragments, I'm sure they'll eventually, it's clear that what you have here is just a misprint, and it was meant to be Kusivo with a samach, and then if the Zion took the place of the samach, some later editor must have done that in order to fit it with what actually happened subsequently.
Yeah. So basically, I just wanted to look at one of the oracles of Bilam that we don't necessarily look at. I mean, everyone always focuses on slightly earlier one that has Matovu Alecha Yaakov Mishkanotecha Yisrael. But this was also an oracle that had a lot of play in later tradition. There's a lot more on this. I imagine there's a lot more in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I just don't know the scrolls that well. And I haven't read one of the books I have here, which is called, well, first of all, let me stop the share and hold up the book, The Scepter and the Star, Messianism in Light of the Dead Sea Scrolls, by one of the great scholars, John Collins, who's one of the experts in this area. And look at the title that he chose. And in fact, when I first saw the book, it was like, well, where does that verse sounds familiar. Where does it come from? And that's what started my interest in that little section. So just a little bit in our parasha, obviously so much more. And then, of course, the end of the parasha, it's not all Bilam. The end of the parasha, of course, is the very sad story of the Israelite men whoring after the Moabite women, turning to their gods, and the community kind of paralyzed with sadness. Even Moshe and Aaron, well, not Aaron, he died, but Moshe and the leaders crying, in front of their tents. And it was Pinchas ben Elazar rises up and strikes down the guilty parties. Rather dramatic image. And that's a whole nother thing to study. Pinchas is associated with Eliyahu, another nice, quiet guy. Pardon me?
We could do it next week.
Yeah, that's true. Because next week we talk about Pinchas.
Right.
Yeah, fascinating how they connect these. And actually, I should say that, it might be a little frightening, but both Eliyahu and Pinchas are imaginary guests at a Brit Milah. Which is kind of, it's one of my colleagues wrote a book, which also I'm sorry to say I haven't read yet, The Savage in Judaism. Which looks at some of this stuff. Maybe I'll have a chance to do some studies in it, see what he has to say. So thank you very much. Great to see everybody again.
Great to see you, Rabbi Popky.
Yeah, and Charlotte, again, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday,
you could keep celebrating. It's all right.
Charlotte may have a birthday, but her age never changes.
That's true.
What am I, 21?
Oh, if you want to be, why not?
She told me she was 87 5 years ago, and she still tells me that.
All right, listen, there are plenty of people that are, they celebrate their 39th birthday every year.
Right.
Why not?
Empty nest, Rabbi.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I already missed them. What can I say?
I know.
Yeah.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Reminder, Shabbat on the beach. So if you're zooming in, it's at 7.
Okay.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.